All rise and come to order. Court is back in session.
Secretary, remain standing for the jury.
Everybody be seated, please. May proceed, Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Your Honor. Still on the topic of Luis Rivera, the government brought up how he got, although he got most of the things wrong, he got some facts right. Like, how would he know that Dan Markel was leaving town? Well, he had the evidence, but if he's in an agreement with Sigfredo Garcia, he's going to know that information. If, to clear that up, Charles Adelson is in an agreement with Sigfredo Garcia, he's going to know that information. And then the bullet hole. Again, I don't doubt, he's in the trash now, so I don't have his photo, but I don't doubt that he was up there. But the government coming up here and saying, well, he got these, that's like a parent walking in and talking to the teacher of their child and saying, look, I know my kid failed the test miserably, but he got those two right, so he should pass. That wouldn't fly in an algebra test. It sure as heck should not fly in a first-degree murder trial. Let's go back to the how and the why. We talked about Rivera. We know how and why he did what he did. The government, they were desperate for the Adelsons, who I agree, clear motive. And as Catherine said, guilt. With this, I want to feel and I want to think that it was not a matter of we're going to paint a target, that it was more a matter of their judgment being clouded, that it threw their focus off, that they then make a deal with the shooter. And we'll get to that. Luis Rivera was the shooter. Wendy Adelson, as we saw from their presentation, the one with clear motive, their witness. Again, we're talking about the how and the why. The why. Catherine put pressure on her for cooperation, and then we'll get our case. What they didn't count on, however, is that Catherine Magbanua was innocent. And here we are in trial. Now, the government, during their cross-examination of Ms. Magbanua, offensively made the comment of a payoff. First, and you know this, what attorneys say is not evidence. It's a sign of their desperation. There's no evidence of it. It was a baseless attack to try to plant a seed in your mind that she's sitting up there and testifying and has taken this case to trial for other reasons. It's also offensive because there's no amount of money that you could pay a mother of two. I'm not a mother. There's no amount of money that you could pay, but I know this. There's no amount of money that you could pay a mother of two to risk never seeing her children again. So let me get this. Their thought is that Catherine sacrifices seeing her children so that Wendy can be with hers. They can't see it. They can't understand it. That she's innocent and she wasn't involved. How and why? So then how did this murder happen? Look, I'm in no position to get up here and say, well, I'm positive that's what happened. But in looking at the evidence and looking at the facts, there's a more reasonable scenario of what happened. The government tried to say that there were no connections whatsoever between Charles Adelson and Sigfredo Garcia. But there were. And again, it wasn't through Catherine Magbanua. It was about her. So let's talk about the position that each one of them were in. Charles Adelson wanted the murder to happen. We know that from Jeffrey Lacasse. He had money. Sigfredo Garcia wanted Catherine Magbanua back. We know that from multiple witnesses. And he had the means. The government's response to this theory is that there's no evidence of a connection in between these two gentlemen. They asked Sergeant Corbett on the stand, you've gone through hundreds of thousands of messages and iCloud information for Charles Adelson. Is there any indication of communication between the two? And his answer was no. But on my cross-examination, I brought out weeks before the murder, months before the murder, there was an indication of communication. Now, I'm not trying to say that communication happened that day, but it was clear that Sigfredo Garcia was trying to get in contact. And Catherine Magbanua, through her messages, knew that. To get in contact with Charles Adelson. Now, their response is, well, there's no cell phone communications from the numbers that we have. That presupposes that the communication would have only happened over the phone, or that there would have to be connection. Maybe, wild thought, they were communicating through other means because it was talking about a murder. They want you to believe that there's no possibility that at any point in time Sigfredo Garcia confronted Charles Adelson around the time of these messages. He's driving me crazy about his objection about the two of them being together. They believe he walked into a garage and shot a man in the head, but that he doesn't have the ability to confront the man that's standing between him and the woman that he loves. There's also the confrontation on July 1st. We'll get into that more. But there was a connection between the two of them. Not through Catherine Magbanua, about her. But the government, their response, well, there's no evidence of this. That's not how this works. That's not their burden. We talked about this during jury selection, what their burden is. How it's not just a matter of them giving a reasonable explanation and saying, it fits. They need to have enough evidence to prove that there is no other possible reasonable explanation to give you enough letters. And you remember the example in voir dire. To get you to that point, because again, just because it fits doesn't mean that it's the answer. Mr. Zankanet talked about the burden of proof, and I'm not going to go through it again, but this is here for the protection of all of those accused, for the protection of all of us as citizens, including you as jurors, so that years from now, there's not regret for having made a wrong decision. That's why, those are the reasons why this burden of proof is so high. Third topic, Catherine. Evidence of Catherine Magbanua's innocence that's just been pushed to the side. They have years worth of text messages, years, hundreds of thousands of text messages with these people that they believe she was involved with. Nothing about involvement in a murder. Wiretaps, months worth, hundreds of hours, nothing. Her actions. Now, you best believe, had she gotten rid of her phone number or phone, they'd be up here arguing. Evidence of guilt. But she didn't. She had the same phone number up until she was arrested. She changed out her phone just like most of us do with iPhones. I think I still have a 7, but some people, they replace them regularly, yearly when the new one comes out. I'm not saying that's what she did, but the idea that she would still have the same phone years later, no, it's natural. You swap out phones. You upgrade your phone. Sigfredo Garcia got rid of his phone. Luis Rivera got rid of his phone. You would imagine that if she's involved in a conspiracy with these others, they would have told her, hey, this is what you got to do. The deposits. No deposits of cash for Luis Rivera, no deposits of cash for Sigfredo Garcia. But Catherine Magbanua, right around the time of the homicide, deposits money into an account. They want you to believe that she's smart enough to have pulled off this crime, but then stupid enough to have done that. Talked about it in voir dire. You cannot be smart and stupid at the same time. Well, actually, I take that back, because Luis Rivera has tried to do it. She didn't flee. Had she taken 2 steps when they tried to arrest her, they would be up here arguing she tried to get away. We bring out the fact she didn't do anything. She continued with her life, continued with her children, and they want to say, well, that's not evidence of innocence. Normally, maybe that would be a valid argument, but when you have the level of publicity that this case has had, the father of your children's been arrested, Luis Rivera's been arrested, her name's getting dragged through the mud, probable cause affidavits for first-degree murder are released in the media, major outlets are doing specials on the case. She's born in the Philippines, speaks our language. Somebody guilty would have left. She stayed. Let's go back to Luis Rivera. Violent gang leader. The lead investigators and agents on this case tried to dance around and go, wow, I don't know about that. Charged with murder, head of a gang since 15. Violent gang leader. Convicted many times over, RICO murder. Supplies, he rented the car, rented the hotel, bought the bullets that entered Dan Markel's head, bought the gun that fired those bullets. They made a deal with him. No death, do a few more years, didn't tell him about the violation of probation. A couple of years for that guy. Catherine Magbanua, college graduate. First time through the system. Miss Kappelman herself said, and it came out in evidence, as the key to her own freedom. If she were willing to cooperate, if she had any information, which she does not, they would probably give her the key to the city. There's only one reason why a single mother of 2 young children would sit in custody for 3 years in confinement, risking it all. She's innocent. That is the only explanation. Let's draw a comparison, guys, please. Let's draw a comparison over to Wendy Adelson, their witness. Somebody who they believe was, I don't know who they think is behind them, that they believe is involved. Their witness, a trained attorney, had to be subpoenaed, had to be given, and the judge explained it, immunity. She laughed at them. Laughed at them. No, I'm not going to be arrested. Ms. Kappelman had her on the stand, somebody she believes is behind this, didn't ask her the tough questions. Had her on the stand and could have put her on the spot and didn't do it. Now, let's compare that witness over to Catherine Magbanua. Not an attorney. No immunity. Didn't have to testify. Everything on the line. Subjecting herself to cross-examination, actual examination by Ms. Kappelman, by a trained and experienced attorney. Grilled on facts from years ago, after years in confinement. Nothing incorrect. She even confessed to what would be crimes. Not reporting cash tips on her tax returns. Look, I don't condone it, but I'm imagining it's a very common practice when it comes to cash tips. But she admitted to it. What does that mean? It means she's forthcoming. Doesn't mean that she was involved in a murder. Now, we did it for Luis Rivera. Let's do it now for Kathy Magbanua. But before I do it, remember, this is not a civil case. Do you believe Kathy Magbanua more than Luis Rivera? It's not that tug of war that we talked about in jury selection. It's that rope in gym class hanging from the ceiling that the government has to climb all by themselves. So it's not a matter of do you believe Luis Rivera more or Kathy Magbanua. If that were the case, I have no doubt that you would say, I believe Kathy Magbanua more. But I'm not trying to draw a comparison in between the two, but it's important to evaluate for Kathy Magbanua. Did the witness seem to have an opportunity? Your Honor, is that big enough for you?
They're worried about them more than me. I know what it says.
Did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? And the answer to that, of course. Everything's on the line here for her. Does the witness testimony agree with the other testimony and other evidence in the case? Yes. Had they investigated it, they would know that it all matches up. Has the witness been offered or received any money, preferred treatment, or other benefit in order to get the witness to testify? No. Had any pressure or threat been used against the witness that affected the truth of the witness's testimony? Threats were made on her, but not in this context. Did the witness at some other time make a statement that is inconsistent with the testimony he or she gave in court? Has the witness been convicted of a felony? Luis Rivera, all those boxes are checked. Kathy Magbanua, they're not. This is a case that began in desperation. Charles Adelson and Sigfredo Garcia. The connection, not through Kathy Magbanua, but about her. It is no coincidence, that right when the murder finally happens, Charles Adelson, and we know it from the messages, we know it from Kathy Magbanua, ghosted her, broke up with her. They keep wanting to say that there's no contact in between Charles Adelson and Sigfredo Garcia. Again, we know that in late 2013, and we know it from Luis Rivera, he was following them because he objected so much to it. He was potentially calling Charles Adelson. The progression of that is at some point in time you confront him. Now, the one problem with the prosecution's theory, again, if you get deeper into it, things start to not make sense. July 1st, there's this confrontation, there's this fight between Charles Adelson and Sigfredo Garcia. Now, Sigfredo Garcia doesn't run up to Kathy Magbanua's window, he runs up to Charles Adelson's window and starts pounding on it. 17 days later, the murder happens. You can't resolve that. You can't figure it out under their theory that in this whole thought, let me sidetrack for a second, because the government said something in their close that potentially Catherine was playing the middle and that Charles didn't know that on the other end it was Sigfredo, and Sigfredo didn't know on the other end that it was for Charles. Remember what Luis Rivera said. We're doing it for the dentist's sister. Then they would have known exactly, and everybody knew who the dentist was, that they're doing it for Charles Adelson. But it doesn't make sense, 17 days before the murder happens, that these guys are fighting with each other and somehow Catherine's caught in the middle of it. What makes more sense is that the agreement was, you break up with her and get away from her, I'll do this for you. But he didn't. That trip in June to Key West was supposed to be, and we know it from Agent Sanford, the goodbye tour. But on July 1st, they're still hanging out together. Was there a situation that Charles Adelson felt that the other end didn't live up to their end of the bargain because it didn't happen in June? "17 days later, after this argument, he's dead, and Charles Adelson breaks up with Catherine Magbanua. Now, again, this is a case that began in desperation and it continued in desperation. Luis Rivera and the government. Rivera, he wanted his life. He wanted his freedom. When I say life, I'm not saying outside. He literally wanted to live because they were trying to kill him. And he wanted his freedom. The government, desperation, wanted to be able to move forward with their theory. Now, their presentation shows this desperation. They gave bits and pieces. Because the more bits and pieces that you gave, the more information, that peg that they're trying to get into the round hole, all of a sudden it becomes more square, bigger and bigger, and it no longer fits. And they were also painting that target. We had to show the rest. The defense, we had to show the rest of that information. Now let me give you some examples of how they did this. The government wanted to draw the connection in between Catherine Magbanua and Wendy Adelson, right? And they presented this photo to you. Defense Exhibit 41. You haven't seen this yet. That's a real photo. Catherine's credit card right there. Out of the 3 versions of this photo, now these look the same, but if you look at Catherine's glasses in relation to Wendy's shoulder, you'll see that it actually moves. Out of 3 photos that they have of this day, they present to you the photo without Catherine's credit card. Because this would indicate that Catherine's paying for those drinks, paying for that day, paying for herself. But the attempts to guide you, or guide is not the word, to give you the wrong perception, the limited perception of the case. We go back to Mary Hull, the income analysis. 2013, she didn't explain that. She didn't explain what those dashes were. And then they started talking about the deposit transactions and how Catherine was going to different banks to make deposits. Again, they have no information as to the location of these ATMs and their location in relation to each other. But one thing that we pointed out, this was normal behavior for Catherine, where she would make deposits at 2 different banks on the same day. Again, trying to paint that picture, paint that target brighter and brighter. It continued when they were talking to Sergeant Chris Corbett about text messages, and this happened yesterday, where they actually only had him read part of the message, where Charles Adelson offered to help out. I had to get up and read the rest of it with Sergeant Corbett, which was, no, I'm good. And then enter in other text messages talking about how she was paying him back for loans. One of the big pieces of evidence from Luis Rivera, what they believe is evidence, that's his story, is the morning of July 19th. Now again, the stuff with the cell phone locations, that's generalized areas. Don't be misled by their evidence, believing that that means that somebody was at an exact location. We know from the experts that I could be here with my phone, but pinging off a tower miles away. But one thing that Luis Rivera said, he goes, Catherine called me. When the government had Agent Corbett up on the stand, offensively. And this is their attempts to make their case fit, to misguide you. They went and they referenced the 1022 call. They went first to the 1022 call because that's a call from Catherine Magbanua to Luis Rivera. What they didn't do was point out where I had to come up on cross-examination, as if you missed it yourselves, which I doubt, that the first call was from Luis Rivera to Catherine Magbanua. It's offensive that the government, the ones that should be the most transparent and truthful in this, should be presenting this evidence correctly. But instead, they're trying to argue the evidence in a way that fits their theory, instead of just being transparent, objective, and straightforward and giving it to you to make the decision. We had to do that. We shouldn't have to. This is your conspiracy. There was connection in between the two. It was about Catherine Magbanua, not through her. Now, the framers of our Constitution were genius in the way that they set up our government. The government has immense power. We all know that. But there are limitations. They can't elect themselves, and they can't determine the guilt or innocence of a person. The reason why the framers took that from the government, from the judiciary, is that they feared that they would become biased. And that's why they entrusted it to the people, knowing that they were the only ones that could be objective in the review of evidence in a case. Now, Your Honor, if I can have one brief second.
Okay.
The government's desperation, and I promised that I would come back to Luis Rivera one last time. Their desperation led to blindness. I promise I'm almost done. Their desperation has led to their blindness of facts. Luis Rivera was a shooter. Luis Rivera got up on the stand, he told you how Dan Markel was on the phone, how Dan Markel put his arm up. Explain to me how he could see in that dark garage and see all of that. He knows that because he's the one that pulled the gun on Dan Markel and killed him. There's no way you're seeing that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what a wrongful prosecution looks like. It's within your power to stop it from becoming a wrongful conviction. Catherine Magbanua was innocent. She wasn't involved in a conspiracy to murder Professor Dan Markel. She didn't solicit anybody. She was in no way involved with his murder. She's been in custody for 3 years. It's time for her to go home. Thank you, Your Honor.